Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 45, 12-Step Slogans. As well as the 12 steps, there are a number of slogans and sayings within 12-Step Fellowship that can be helpful in understanding the process of recovery. These common clichés can lose their impact through familiarity, but there is great wisdom in each of them, both at the literal level and also in the deeper meanings. There's also, unfortunately, the potential for misunderstanding. This is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but it is worth looking at some of the better known ones. One day at a time. The simple idea of recovering one day at a time is very helpful and also true. We can only ever recover in this moment. It's often impossible in early recovery to contemplate being abstinent for the long term, but the idea of just one day is more manageable. Sometimes we can go for 1 hour at a time if need be, or even shorter time periods. We postpone the temptation to relapse until the following day, by which time the compulsion will most likely have diminished. The same can also be true for attending meetings and practicing the 12-step program. It only ever has to be done today. There's no need to project into the future. Later in recovery, it becomes clear that life can ever only be lived moment to moment. Thoughts of the past and future exist only in the realm of the personal ego mind. As non-personal consciousness, there is only ever the eternal moment of now. Honesty, open-mindedness and willingness. We have covered each of these key ingredients for recovery in previous chapters. Honesty is really about self-honesty. Open-mindedness means having the humility to accept that our personal beliefs and opinions are barriers to wisdom. And willingness is all about accepting our brokenness and committing to an ongoing process of transformation. Without these three ingredients, there will be no recovery. This is how it works. Keep coming back. Regular attendance at meetings is important at all stages of recovery. There is no official membership of 12-Step Fellowship. The only requirement for attending meetings is a desire to become abstinent. There's also no cost other than a small voluntary contribution to cover the cost of room hire and refreshments. Meetings provide all of the benefits previously described, and the primary motivation for attending will change as recovery progresses. The meetings are as valuable to those in long-term recovery as they are for those in the early days. The early benefit is in receiving help, whereas the later value is in selfless service. Keep it simple. Addiction is a complex condition, but the solution is simple. There is a tendency to overcomplicate recovery, but this is not necessary. In fact, the simpler we keep it, the better the result. Attend meetings, get a sponsor, follow the guidance, work through the steps, practice the spiritual principles, and help others. This is all we need to do. At a deeper level, we've seen that all complexity arises from simplicity. Recovery is about dealing with the problem of addiction at the deepest level, and the root problem is simple misidentification. Keeping it simple means keeping focused on the core problem. It works if you work it. This saying is often followed by, it won't if you don't, or, so work it, you're worth it. There's great wisdom in all of this. 12-step recovery definitely works, but we actually have to do it rather than just talk about it. If we do not put in the action, then it will not work. Spiritual progress requires action. It really is that simple. It's also true to say that we are worth it. Often an addict will feel so broken and worth less that they find it difficult to believe that they are worthy of recovery. But all human beings are worthy of recovery, because transformation into the second half of life is the natural cycle of consciousness. There's no such thing as being too broken. It's the personal ego self that is broken, rather than the true self or being. Every human being is equally worthy, because we are all expressions of the one consciousness. Surrender to win. Admitting our brokenness and powerlessness is the first step in recovery, and we cannot recover without this surrender. It's also important to remain surrendered throughout recovery, otherwise the personal ego self will take the credit for the progress that we've made, and the identity will remain as personal. The whole point of recovery is to finally surrender the personal ego self, and so we need to be wary of going backwards. Brokenness leads to surrender and humility. There can be no ongoing spiritual progress without continuing humility. We need to remain a fellowship of the broken, so that consciousness can reveal itself through each of us. Let go, let God. This is the same idea as above, but we need to be careful not to abdicate responsibility for recovery. If the God word is conceived as third party, then this slogan can be very misleading. It is abiding in and as consciousness that provides the solution to addiction, and consciousness is our true nature. We are letting go in favour of non-personal consciousness, and we need to take action in order to bring this about. Letting go in isolation is highly unlikely to result in sustainable surrender of the personal self. We need to act as if we truly are consciousness until such time as this new identity becomes established. Having faith in the God word without taking any action is a naive misunderstanding. Hand it over. This is often said in the context of handing problems over to a higher power. The potential for misunderstanding here is again that a third-party higher power will solve all of our issues, including our addiction. We tend to hand over problems when we can't solve them as our personal selves. Well, this can be useful in early recovery, because the personal self does need help, but this is not the eventual solution. Without understanding the purpose of the steps, we will hold on to problems that we think we can solve, and hence remain identified as the personal self. Whatever our individual conception may be, the higher power is non-personal consciousness. What we really need to be handing over is the personal ego self who thinks that it has problems. The subsequent emergence of identity as non-personal consciousness will obviously not perceive any personal problems. Fake it to make it. There's more wisdom in this slogan than first appears. It's usually used in early recovery to indicate that we may not really understand what we are doing, but we do it anyway. It's also used in respect of trying to conceive of a higher power. The idea is to believe in something or anything until our own conception gradually emerges. Often we use the fellowship itself as a higher power, which of course it is, in the sense that it's a more genuine expression of consciousness than we might find elsewhere. The real wisdom in this slogan relates to step 7. We act as if we already are non-personal consciousness until such time as our sense of identity shifts. The truth is that the qualities of consciousness that we are faking are actually far more authentic than the fake mask of personal self that we have hitherto been taking ourselves to be. We need to be wary of the idea of reaching a stage where we make it. There is no end to the shift in balance of identity between human and being, whilst we still exist as human. We can, however, continually move closer to being without ever actually making it. Progress, not perfection. This slogan can easily be misunderstood and cause stagnation in recovery. As just covered, there's no end to the progress that we can make, and we can never reach perfection. This is the intended meaning of this saying. We will continue to make mistakes in identity and hopefully learn from them. Hence, we make further progress. The problem arises if we use this slogan as an excuse for not making progress. The personal self will be tempted to make excuses for itself. Imperfection is inevitable, but it is not without purpose. If we learn from imperfection, then we can make progress towards perfection. If we settle for imperfection and lose our willingness for more change, then we stagnate. Using this slogan as an excuse for continuing selfish and self-centered behavior is willful ignorance of the whole concept of recovery. Yet. This tiny word is intended to capture the progressive nature of addiction. We may hear others share their consequences of addiction and conclude that we are not that bad. We are told that addiction progresses, but somehow the personal ego self is able to make itself an exception. This terminal uniqueness will prevent an addict from engaging fully in recovery, and hence the probability of relapse remains. When a relapse occurs, the consequences are generally worse than before. This cycle may be repeated many times. The consequences that had previously seemed unimaginable now happen and cause suffering to us and to our loved ones. It had always been the case of when rather than if, yet we have been unable to believe it or accept it. If we are addicts, then we are all suffering from a similar condition, even if the inevitable consequences have not happened yet. Similarities, not differences. This suggestion is all about identifying with the aspects and levels of addiction. Each human being is unique, and hence each addict has an individual story and experience. It's very easy to find differences in our particular circumstances, but all this does is reinforce personal uniqueness and keep us in denial of addiction. If we are going to recover, then we need to rule ourselves into 12-step fellowship rather than rule ourselves out. There are many similarities in the way that addicts think, feel and behave, and these outweigh the differences. The personal self will hear what it wants to hear and use this to justify its own imagined existence. If we focus on similarities, then we will come to see that the deeper we go, the more alike we are. Ultimately, we are all expressions of the same consciousness, and hence at that level we are not only similar but identical. Individual differences are seen as expressions of diversity rather than proof of separation. Wholeness and individuality coexist once it is seen that consciousness is all there is. Easy does it. We need to be careful about the true meaning of this slogan. Recovery can be easy if we can grasp the idea of living one day at a time and relax into the process of transformation. However, we've seen that recovery requires consistent, persistent action on our part, and this is not easy, particularly in the early stages. Taking it easy does not mean taking no action. We need to practice the steps until they become easy. We need to put in the effort until it becomes effortless. It is an effort for the personal self to act as non-personal consciousness, but once the balance of identity shifts to consciousness, then it becomes easy. It's no effort for consciousness to be itself. Once we are identified as consciousness, then we can take it easy, because life is taking care of life. A bridge to normal living. This is another slogan that requires care. The idea of a bridge implies a one-off crossing from one place to another. The concept of normal living can be interpreted to mean living as others do in society. If this slogan is understood in this way, then we are heading for disappointment. Recovery does lead us to cross from personal identity to consciousness. But this is an ongoing journey rather than a one-off event. Living as non-personal consciousness is far from normal in today's selfish, self-centered world. The context of this slogan is all about not having to spend our whole lives in 12-step fellowship. Normal living is about family, career, and all other aspects of life. Our opportunity is to participate in life as an expression of consciousness, rather than as a personal ego self. The bridge to normal living is really an ongoing journey of living an extraordinary life. And there's no such thing as normal. Give it away to keep it. This slogan is technically correct, but is open to a fundamental misunderstanding of recovery. We've seen that self-forgetting is one of the key spiritual practices and forms the basis of step 12. It's therefore true to say that giving away recovery to others is beneficial to our own progress. There is a sense of flow whereby selfless giving creates a surge of the qualities of consciousness through us that cleanses the lens of perception. And there's also the idea of resonance, whereby we attract experiences that match our own vibration of consciousness. There is a sense of purpose and usefulness that feels good. This is, however, all from the perspective of the personal self. Sooner or later, the purpose of recovery is to identify as consciousness. From this perspective, consciousness is a constant flow of its own qualities that are based on love. When a human becomes being, there is a natural tendency to give, because the nature of being is unconditional love. For those in recovery, this giving is most effective in helping other addicts. As this happens, we abide more and more in consciousness, and this takes us even closer to home. The wisdom in this slogan is therefore all about motive. If we are giving recovery away in order to keep it for ourselves, then our motive is still personal and selfish. If we are living in a natural state of giving, then our motive is selfless. As we cross the bridge, we should find that our motives change. A human being is always part selfish and part selfless, but it's a question of balance. If we are still giving it away in order to keep it, then we still have further to go. Self-honesty will reveal the truth. More will be revealed. This slogan states that there is no end to revelation. As we progress in recovery by practicing spiritual principles in all of our affairs, then we gradually come to understand. We learn more about ourselves and we begin to see wisdom where previously it had escaped us. As we abide more deeply in consciousness, then this wisdom and understanding will emerge naturally. It's not the personal ego self that becomes wise. Consciousness is wisdom, and this is what we become. This is what we are. The further we go, the more will inevitably be revealed. Stick with the winners. The idea behind this slogan is well intentioned, although it can be seen as rather disparaging. 12-step fellowship is full of addicts at various stages of recovery. Length of sobriety is one indication of progress, although this is not always a reliable measure of recovery. The idea then is to follow the advice and mimic the behaviour of those with good recovery rather than gravitating towards those who are still struggling. But the idea of winners obviously implies that some of us are losers, but this is not the intended meaning. We are all winners to some extent if we are in recovery, whatever stage we may be at, and we also ebb and flow in recovery, so in effect we take it in turns to be winners, depending on how we are doing at any given moment. Sometimes we are able to offer support, and at other times we need support. Fellowship is mutually supportive. Attraction, not promotion. This saying comes from Tradition 11, which concerns public relations policy. The principle is valid at both individual and fellowship level. Humility is a key feature of consciousness, and one important expression of humility is anonymity. The best way to encourage spiritual principles in others is not through evangelism or promotion, but by living as non-personal consciousness in our daily lives. Not every caterpillar is yet ready for metamorphosis. There's little point in promoting recovery to those who are not really interested. And there's also the matter of vibrational resonance and the law of attraction. All of this underpins the concept of attraction rather than promotion. Our task is simply to live the principles rather than preach them. We will naturally attract those who are ready to open up to perennial wisdom. Yellow card. This is often a physical yellow card with the words, "Who you see here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here." It is usually read out during a meeting to remind us that confidentiality is of vital importance. This confidentiality should not be confused with secrecy. Anonymity is all about humility, and confidentiality is about the safety of individual openness. Those who attend meetings need to feel safe that they can share openly without fear of gossip or other repercussions. Some will want their attendance at meetings to remain confidential for personal reasons. The principle of the yellow card provides these reassurances, and it operates very effectively for the majority of the time. Occasional breaches of the principle do occur, but these are by far the exception rather than the rule. Serenity Prayer. This short prayer is well known throughout 12-step fellowship. It originates from a longer prayer attributed to Reinhold Niebuhr and dates from the early 1930s. The wording used in 12-step fellowship reads, "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. This is a petition by the personal self for serenity, acceptance, courage, change, wisdom, and knowledge. These are qualities of consciousness, and the prayer can be understood at different levels. In early recovery, it can be used to accept addiction as something that cannot be changed by the personal self. Later, it can be understood to mean that we cannot change anything about our lives other than ourselves. It can be used to pray for acceptance in challenging circumstances. A deeper understanding would be that the I that is praying for serenity and courage is the personal self, and that it is only the identity of the I that can really be changed. And the deepest understanding would be that the condensed, limited form of consciousness that is the personal ego self is turning towards its own true nature and seeking revelation as non-personal consciousness. This is the wisdom of the Serenity Prayer that comes through praying for wisdom. This prayer can take us all the way to consciousness, awareness, knowingness, universal mind, spirit or being, revealing itself to itself. All of these slogans and many others work through repetition. The important thing is to remain open-minded about what they actually mean. If we hold on to an early understanding of a slogan, then repetition can simply entrench a particular interpretation, and we can miss the deeper meaning. These slogans have developed over time, and each one of them can provide us with an instant reminder of the actions needed for effective recovery. There is one particular slogan that I have omitted from this list because it deserves an entire chapter on its own.